The Compliance Life details the journey to and in the role of a Chief Compliance Officer. How does one come to sit in the CCO chair? What are some of the skills a CCO needs to successfully navigate the compliance waters in any company? What are some of the top challenges CCOs have faced, and how did they meet them? These questions and many others will be explored in this new podcast series. The Compliance Life is hosted by Tom Fox, and each month he'll present the story of one CCO through 4 episodes. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
This month I visit with Gwen Hassan. Gwen is the Managing Counsel and Director of Compliance at CNH Industrial. Gwen has had a long career in compliance, literally starting in the 1990s in the healthcare industry with Blue Cross when compliance was just beginning to get started in healthcare. She went to law school while she was working at Blue Cross and then took a variety of jobs, largely in-house, gravitating into the compliance field. It's a fascinating story of the twists and turns of everyone's career. We take a look at, during this podcast series, Gwen's professional background and what led her to pursue a career in compliance. We look at how she balances the practice of law with the practice of compliance. This is somewhat unusual, and this is the first time we've had someone having both roles in a corporation. She talks about her favorite parts about being a compliance officer and why it's necessary to be culturally curious. She gives advice about people who are interested in the compliance field. And we conclude with a podcast on one of Gwen's passions, which is fighting the scourge of human trafficking and the role of the compliance professional in that fight. I know you'll enjoy this month's series. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another series on The Compliance Life. This month, I'm thrilled to have with me Gwen Hassan. She's been a good friend for many years, a well-known compliance practitioner, is someone who has helped many of us in lots of different areas in compliance. So Gwen, first of all, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me.
Thank you for having me, Tom. It's always great to spend time with you. I've enjoyed our friendship over the years and look forward to talking with you today.
So Gwen, you have had an interesting career in compliance, but I wondered if we might be able to start with sort of at the beginning. What led you to even start a law career, which led to compliance? But if you could talk a little bit about maybe your background, your legal education, and some of your professional experience leading to getting into compliance.
Sure. I have an unusual story in that regard, I think. I took a very circuitous route to get to law and to compliance, for that matter. I grew up in Wisconsin and went to the University of Wisconsin for undergrad, where I had great aspirations to go to the business school. And I went into the university having spent time abroad in Spain as a high school student. And when I came back, I had earned, I think it was 16 transfer credits, because I started taking Spanish at the college level in high school and would take a bus downtown to the University of Wisconsin campus and take classes there and then go back to the high school for regular curriculum. But I had, as many people know, University of Wisconsin-Madison is a huge school, and I was one of, 35,000 undergraduates and did not have the best experience with an advisor. So I didn't realize that when I finished my first semester of freshman year, from a credit standpoint, I was a sophomore, and I should have applied to the business school as a first semester freshman, even though I didn't have any of the prerequisites done. So when I got to my sophomore year and went to apply, they said, "Oh, I'm sorry, you're a junior. You're too late to apply to the business school." So I ended up studying communications. I chose argumentation and debate as my undergraduate focus. No intention of going to law school. It hadn't even crossed my mind at that time. But I loved communication, and it was a good route to kind of get into a marketing PR position, which is what I thought I wanted. So that's what I graduated in. I then took my first job in San Francisco and moved out to California, literally sight unseen. I had never even set foot in the state before, and took a job there and worked in marketing communications for a couple of years. And then one of those strange kind of life occurrences happened where everything changes in a minute. My mother was in a horrific accident. She was thrown from a golf cart during a golf tournament, and everyone in the cart rolled down an embankment and into the parking lot, and everyone was severely injured. But she sustained a life-threatening injury. She actually was dead at the scene, and they had to paddle her back and medevac her out. And she had a severe head injury. So as a result, I ended up moving home and helping the family, because she was in intensive care for months and then in a rehab facility for well over a year. My father took a sabbatical because he was a professor at the University of Wisconsin. My sister was currently attending the University of Wisconsin at the time, and I moved home to help. So I moved back, and our next door neighbor growing up was a judge, Judge Stewart, and he came over one day when I was home and said, "Hey, Gwen, has your family retained counsel?" And I was 23 and said, I'm sorry, what?" And he said, "Well, you're going to need an attorney." And I said, I don't know anything about law or about, hiring an attorney. How do I do that? He said, "Well, talk to your dad and see what he'd like to do. But, your family should be preserving their rights at this point, because, somebody flipped that cart, and it wasn't your mom. She wasn't driving it. And it happened at a golf tournament. Someone hosted that tournament. It happened at a golf course that certainly has insurance. And that golf cart manufacturer might be implicated in some way. You need an attorney." So I talked to my dad, who was, as you can imagine, bereft, and he responded and said, "I don't have time for that, Gwen. I've got to focus on your mom. If you want to work with Judge Stewart and find an attorney, go ahead. You handle it." So at 23, there I was trying to figure out how to navigate the legal system. And my neighbor, the judge, helped me find an attorney, and we filed suit, which never went to trial, and ended up settling out and putting all of that money in trust, which then paid for my mother's severe medical care for years and her ongoing care, because she was never able to walk again. She was wheelchair bound. She needed a lot of ongoing kind of care. The point being that during that process, I became fascinated with the law. It was my first introduction to legal practice, to lawyers, to judges. I literally grew up not knowing anyone who was a lawyer and having no exposure to the legal system. So it was an eye-opening experience, and I thought, I think maybe this is something I want to pursue. So I took the LSAT, which luckily I did really well on, because my undergraduate GPA reflected the amount of beer drinking I did as a Wisconsin undergrad. And I applied to a bunch of different law schools and was accepted at DePaul. And so I decided to go to DePaul in Chicago and pursued that while working full time, actually, in the legal department of Blue Cross and Blue Shield. Healthcare Service Corporation was the name of the company in Chicago, and their division, Fort Dearborn Life. And in that role, I was in a paralegal role and working in effectively insurance compliance work. And that was kind of my first introduction to compliance, was in that first role, which I worked in throughout law school, and went part-time at night while working full-time during the day.
So what were some of your early professional experiences after your graduation from law school? Did you go into a firm, or did you go into the corporate world, or did you stay with Blue Cross?
So when I graduated, the Healthcare Service Corporation group did not have an attorney position open. they asked me to stay on as a manager of compliance. But I really wanted to use my law degree. I mean, I had gone to school for 4 years at night to get it, and I really wanted to use it. So I started looking. I had I had an offer from a firm that would have been in their ERISA practice, and I felt like I just couldn't do it. I could not spend my entire legal day with ERISA. It seemed like something I couldn't do. So I ended up parlaying my years working in the legal department for Healthcare Service Corporation and Fort Dearborn and Blue Cross into an in-house position. So I was one of, it was the 90s. It was a different time, but I managed to go straight in-house after law school. As a matter of fact, I started my first job with Hartmarks Corporation. I was their third attorney of a two-attorney department at the time, and I started with them while studying for the bar, and then passed into the bar, luckily, and became their third attorney. The youngest attorney on staff, the newest and least experienced attorney on staff, and the only one who spoke another language. So they had a number of holdings. Actually, by the way, Hartmarks doesn't exist anymore. It filed for bankruptcy years later. It was the holding company for Hickey Freeman and Hart Schaffner and Marks, really expensive men's suits that really nobody wears anymore. So,
I wore them
yeah.
in the
Well,
90s.
so I ended up then kind of getting thrown anything that had to do with their holdings in Mexico because I spoke Spanish fluently. And they had a number of issues related to the workforce there, related to regulatory compliance. And from there, I just expanded out into other holdings in other countries. So I became kind of by default the person who handled a lot of foreign issues because I'm the one who had some language skills. So that was my first kind of foray into international compliance work, was in that first role. And it was great because I learned I loved it. I had the chance to use language skills, but also use my law degree, and pull a little bit from the compliance experience that I got during law school. And it combined nicely into a flow, if you will, of all of my skills.
When unfortunately we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us next week for our next episode, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom. Me too.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to this episode of The Compliance Life. I hope you will join me again next week, where I take up another episode with Scott Sullivan in The Compliance Life. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you would like to be featured on The Compliance Life, please give me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, if you like this series, please give us a rating on iTunes. Any review and rating would definitely help get the word out about the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks again.